All righty, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 2 tonight, and we're going to finish a little early because the kids are next door, and we're going to give them their certificates for lads to leaders and whatnot. So I don't know if they're planning on coming over here or us going over there. We'll figure that out. In fact, let me text Stacy just so she can tell me. They're eating ice cream next door, apparently. Having like a Devo. Yeah, right? All right, let's get started. 1 Timothy chapter 2. Okay, so when we first started 1 Timothy, we talked about there's two problems that Timothy is trying to deal with. He's trying to deal with Gnosticism, which is the idea that people knew so much that they had become more enlightened because they realized just how sinful earth is and just how sinful the flesh is. And so it's the idea, it really is the basis for like the idea that you can't do anything right because your body is sinful, and so you just have to go with what your body says. And it really is it's the basis for a lot of false ideas that come from the first century. But it's really kind of the basis of the idea that still goes on about like, well, God knows my heart, but I like this, or I do this, or I was made this way, or born this way, or whatever. So that's Gnosticism. And then the second one was this Jewish thing that was coming from the people of the Old Testament that were essentially saying that we need to take the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we need to take all the myths surrounding both, and we need to take some of the pagan myths and mix them all together and make this new Christianity into something that is more palatable to the rest of the world, right? Because the fact is that when given our own opinions, we will always try to find a way to bring in the outside world by compromising on one thing or another, right? Okay, so those are the two reasons why Timothy writes the first book of 1 Timothy. Because why, or Paul writes the first book of 1 Timothy. Why, well, let me rephrase that. What is the position that Timothy holds within the church when Paul writes this book? What is he? He's a preacher, right? A very young preacher, right? He's somewhere probably around the age of about 24 to 25. And he needs Paul to encourage him to try to realize these two things and push them out. And it's really important for us to realize that, because when we get into passages like 1 Timothy chapter 2, and he's talking more about how we interact with the world, it's pretty important that a preacher understands the concepts that are believed by the people to whom he's preaching, right? So if I'm going to live in Utah, I probably need to know something about Mormonism, right? If I'm going to live in East Africa, I probably need to know something to some semblance of the religion of I can't think of the name of the people that live in Tanzania, the major ethnic group that live in Tanzania. Anyways, if I'm going to live in Northern Africa, I'm probably going to need to know something about Islam, right? If I'm going to be a preacher, I need to know what is believed by the people around. So, like down here, if I'm going to live in Georgia, I probably need to know something about Baptists, right? It's because that's everybody and their sister are Baptist, right? So there's nothing inherently attacking about that. He's just writing to Timothy, who is at Ephesus, and he's talking about the problems that Timothy is probably going to see when he's out preaching and teaching the Bible, or the gospel, because the Bible wasn't written yet, right? All right, so let's dive into 1 Timothy chapter 2 now. All right? 1 Timothy chapter 2. First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. So we studied that last time, but he's wanting to point out that even though the people that Timothy is preaching to are probably going to hold one of these ideas that Paul is talking about primarily in this book, that doesn't mean that we should pray for them. That doesn't mean that we should look to the government and say, well, they're all against us, and so we just write them off, right? As Christians, it's our job to try to influence people around us, and one of those ways is to pray for them so that the door might be open, so that we can talk to them and try to get them to realize the gospel and other things, right? So he says, first of all, I want prayers and supplications, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions. And I've told y'all about the guy that we used to go to church with that said he was very adamant, that at the beginning of every single meeting, every single worship service, every single Bible study, every single fellowship meal, that the first thing you have to do is pray for the government, because Timothy was told that first of all, I urge that prayer and supplications be made for kings. But he's talking about the most important thing, right? If we're looking at 1 Timothy as if we are all trying to learn from what Timothy is told to do. Even though not all of us are preachers, but there's something we can learn from it, right? If we're going to teach people the gospel, we need to be willing to pray for them, right? It's really hard to teach someone the gospel that we don't have any desire in praying for their souls, right? Because if you're not praying for their souls and you're not mindful about their souls, then why would you be teaching them the gospel? Most of the time it's just to try to get them told and try to make them look like a fool, right? All right, so let's move on. Verse number 3. This is good. It's pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So a lack of love can cause people to be lost, because he's talking about love in verses 1, 2, and 3, really 1 and 2. And so if he's talking about love, and he's saying we need to love people, we need to pray for people, we need to show love to people, then our lack of that can be the reason why someone rejects the gospel. All right, so now look at verse 5. Somebody read 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5 and 6 for me. 1 Timothy chapter 2, 5 and 6. All right. So, this passage, it seems kind of out of the ordinary, doesn't it? If he's talking about love, he's talking about praying for people, why then does Timothy get told in the middle of this section about this mediator between God and man, Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom? Why does Paul seem to break the context, talk about Jesus being the mediator, and then bring back the context in verse number 7? All right, look back at verse number 2, okay? We need to pray for kings in high positions that we may lead peaceful and quiet life, godly, dignified in every way. So, how can you live a peaceful, quiet, godly, dignified life without being saved? Well, okay, you can live a peaceful life without being saved, right? By ignorance. You might be able to live a quiet life without being saved by ignorance. But can you be godly accidentally? No, right? Because what does it mean to live a godly life? Godlike. It is impossible to live a godlike life when you don't know who God is, right? Let's go over to Galatians chapter 5. All right, Galatians 5. Somebody read verses 22 and 23. Galatians 5, 22 and 23. Brooke comes in here with a different translation of the ESV and throws me for a loop. Just messing with you. I thought Ron isn't here. I'm used to him throwing me for a loop with the translations. No. All right, so the fruit of the Spirit, right? One of those is goodness, faithfulness. You can't have goodness without the defining standard of what is good. You can't have faithfulness without the defining standard of what is faith. You can't have godliness, 1 Timothy 2, without having some sort of standard of here's what is godly, right? So, back to 1 Timothy 2 now. So he says, I want you to live peaceful, quiet, godly lives, dignified in every way. And the only way to do that is to be ransomed by Jesus Christ and have the mediator. Because, frankly, you and I, in the culture and in the world, living as we do, we will get corrupted. Seems like too harsh, I guess, but we will have the world pushing in on us and wanting to change our ideas, right? So what Paul is trying to get across is the idea that, yeah, okay, physical things are not sinful. There is no physical thing that is inherently sinful. It's impossible, right? Because every physical thing was created by who? God. And God can't create sin, right? He can create us with the ability to sin, but he can't create sin, so he can't make a tree that is just inherently sinful. In fact, there was a tree that was sinful. What was it? Tree of knowledge of good and evil. But it wasn't sinful in and of itself, was it? The only sin came about. You ever seen a baby getting dragged by his armpit? The sin came about when the tree was used in a way by man in a way that it wasn't intended to be used for, right? So there's no physical thing that is sinful. But man corrupts the law of God. And so if we're going to live quiet and peaceful lives, we need to realize that the only way we're going to do that is through Jesus Christ, right? All right, so let's move on, because this is the funny part. Not funny part. This is the fun part. There we go. All right, verse number 7. For this I was appointed, a preacher and an apostle. I'm telling the truth, I'm not lying. A teacher of the Gentiles in faith and truth. All right, so it's Paul's job to tell people about the ransom that Jesus gave, to tell people about how to live peaceful, quiet, dignified lives, right? All right, so now, I desire then that in every place men should pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or quarreling. All right, here's the question. We're going to spend as much time as we can on this because I have a ton of Bible verses that I want to go through and read all of them. What in the world does 1 Timothy 2:8 mean? I desire then that in every place men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. What does it mean? It means that, first off, women are not allowed to pray, period. Is that what that means? No. All right, we're going to talk about the gender roles here in just a second, but let's talk about the latter part of that, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. What is the act of lifting holy hands? Is it figurative? Is it literal? All right? It is figurative, right? Now, in order to get that, let's look at what it means to lift hands, okay? And I'm not saying throw hands. I'm saying lift hands. Dalen started laughing because he knew where I was going with that. Right, so what does it mean to lift hands? Let's go back to the Old Testament and let's look at a couple verses, okay? Somebody get Psalm 63, verse 4. Psalm 63, verse 4, and I need someone else to get Psalm 28, verse 2. Psalm 63, 4 and 28, 2. Who's got 63, 4 for me? All right, and 28, 2? Comes right after 28, 1. I don't know if y'all knew that or not. All right, so 68, what was that? 63, 4. 63, 4 said, I'm lifting my hands in worship, right? 28, 2 is about prayer when he's needing God's help, right? So those are two different ideas. In the Old Testament, the lifting of hands, the act of lifting of hands is a couple of things. Number one, there is an actual offering that is offered in the Old Testament called a heave offering. And you literally just pick something up and you do this. It's a heave offering. You're lifting it up to, in kind of like you're showing God what you have. So if you look at the book of Leviticus, you'll find heave offerings with like goats and turtle doves and other situations where they were to lift it up in kind of a, well, it was the physical rendition of what we do on Sundays when we give. We give to God, right? We're not giving just to keep the lights on at the church building or anything else. We're giving to God, and that money is used to turn the lights on and stuff like that, right? So the heave offering in the Old Testament. Then there's this idea that Miss Ginger read about, which is worship. Then there's the idea of prayer, all right? Let's read some more verses. Psalm 134, verse 2. I need somebody to get Psalm 134, verse 2, and somebody else to get Psalm 141, verse 2. By the way, have y'all crossed over into the 21st century where when you're using a paper Bible, pinch to try to read your writing? What did I write there? Yeah, Psalm 134, 2 and 141, 2. All right, lift up your hands to the holy place. What is the holy place? Now, in the Old Testament, it's two. There's two holy places. There's the holy place at the temple, and then there's the holy place where God is, right? So it's talking about where God is. All right, Psalm 141, verse 2. All right, so both of those fit into the worship category, right? They're both worshiping. Maybe the one Dalen read might be talking about prayer in some way, but it's a very worshipful act, right? All right, let's read a couple more. Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 19. I'm just going to give you one verse for that one because Lamentations is kind of hard to find. Lamentations 2, verse 19 for me. All right, somebody tell me, what is the book of Lamentations? There you go. You're on the right path. He was looking at Israel and seeing just what was about to come, right? Because he's a prophet prophesying about the southern kingdom falling. and the horrible nature of their sin and the horrible nature of what was going to happen because of their sin. And so he's looking at it, and Lamentations is basically him weeping. That's what Lamentations literally means, right? To weep. So he's telling them to lift their hands for their children. So that's a prayerful act, right? So we have sacrifice, we have worship, we have prayer. Those three things are really, I mean, you might find maybe one or two that don't specifically fit into one of those categories, but overwhelmingly those three categories are the basis for all of the passages in the Old Testament that mention lifting hands. Okay? Now, let's go back to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy is written by Paul to Timothy, who was of what religion before he learned the gospel and became a Christian? He was Jewish, right? And I think a lot of times, we forget that most of the people in the New Testament, at least at the beginning of the church, who were Christians, came out of Judaism. So when he uses a phrase or something that is specifically Jewish, we kind of throw it out because, oh, that's Old Testament and it's not applicable today. Okay, maybe the law of the Old Testament isn't applicable today, but the idea is always there, right? So he's bringing Timothy back to this idea of lifting hands, which is worship, right? So now let's go back to 1 Timothy chapter 2. I desire that in every place that men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Because what is he trying to get across in 1 Timothy 2? That we should live like we believe, right? So we should be praying for people. We should be loving people. We should be understanding that the only way that we're going to do this and live quiet, peaceful, godly lives is through Jesus Christ. And that means that we need to worship him because of who he is, right? So we need to lift hands. We need to lift holy hands. There's the addition, I guess. That actual phrase, lifting holy hands, is never in the Bible. This is the first time it's been mentioned in the Bible, so it's obviously something different than what they were doing in the Old Testament. Now, that being said, even if 1 Timothy 2 is figurative, okay, all right, parents, I'm going to ask you a question. When you teach your kids to pray, what do you usually teach them to do? Close your eyes, bow your head, right? Or if it's nighttime prayers, then maybe you might even go a step farther and you close your eyes, bow your head, and like lean up against your bed, on your knees. Okay? By the way, the guy who, listen, I got to give it to him for consistency, because the guy who said that you have to pray for the president before you do anything, he also, every time he prayed, would get down on his knees and lift his hands up. Even if you ask him to lead the closing prayer in worship service, he's getting down on his knees and lifting his hands up. So at least there's some consistency there. But 1 Timothy 2 is talking about the importance for us as Christians to worship in a way that is holy, right? But even if that is the case, we teach our kids to close our eyes, bow our heads, maybe put our hands together, maybe get down on our knees. Are those things wrong? No. Why do we do those things? All right, I'm going to tell you. I think the closing of the eyes is so that they quit looking around. All right? The clasping of the hands, that's a traditional way of prayer in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Bowing your head, bowing before God, traditional way of prayer in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Getting down on your knees, same thing. In fact, Islam, how many times a day do they do their prayers? Is it 5, I think? Islam, they get down on their knees and they completely bow over, right? Those are all traditional ways in the Old Testament of praying. Islam got it from the Old Testament. Muhammad wasn't that smart. Just stole some stuff and wrote some extra stuff. Okay? So, when we see this idea of lifting hands in the Old Testament, is it wrong for someone to lift hands in prayer today? Absolutely not. Is it wrong for someone to lift hands when they're worshiping? Absolutely not. Is it wrong for someone to lift hands when they're offering their offering on Sunday, or their contribution, or whatever you want to call the thing that we do on Sunday, or we give money? No, but it's going to be kind of weird because they put the plate down here, and you got to lift your hand up here, and you drop it and make a big noise. And anyway. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is a traditional way that people in the Old Testament and New Testament times worshiped. However, 1 Timothy 2 is specifically not talking about physical actions, right? Because let's read it again. I desire that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. So if we're supposed to take this verse absolutely literal, then women are not allowed to pray. And the only way that you can pray is with your hands lifted up. And the only way that you can pray is if you're not angry. And I don't know about y'all, but sometimes when I pray, it's because I'm angry. Right? Y'all ever driven down Manchester Expressway? Have you ever woke up in the morning, got ready, got in the truck to go to the gym, and you get all the way to Manchester Expressway and you realize that your windows are busted? Okay, so I said some prayers out of anger this morning, and then he called me a few hours later and said they found it. So if we're supposed to take 1 Timothy 2 absolutely literally, then we have to take all of it literally. But what he's talking about is the concept of what worship looks like, right? What worship looks like. Now, he does talk about gender roles here, right? And I think if we get too far into its figurative side, then we throw the gender roles out that he talks about, and there's a reason why he mentioned gender roles in the first place. But the acts of worshiping that he's talking about are obviously meant to be more of an understanding of what worshipful atmosphere and worshipful attitude is. Now let's go on. Verse 9. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty, self-control, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, but what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. All right, if we take it absolutely literally, then women, and y'all have braided hair in here. Well, Jennifer's got her hair up. That's close enough. If we take it absolutely literally, then women can't wear gold. They can't have their hair braided. They have to, if you want to take it other passages very literally, they have to wear a head covering. They have to wear not just a little hat, but like a veil, like an Islamic veil, right? I'll get you 1 second. So if we're going to take it absolutely literally, then we have to take the entire thing literally. But if we're looking at the passage as if he's talking about a worshipful attitude, and he breaks it down into gender roles, because each gender role has a different type of worshipful attitude, right? It is a different attitude that we go toward worship if you're a man and you're leading Lord's Supper that Sunday, right? Guys, if you lead Lord's Supper that Sunday, you're usually thinking about it the entire time, right? It's at least on your mind. It's important to you, right? If you're preaching, obviously it's important to you. You want to try to remember what you studied, right? So the worshipful attitude is what he's talking about, and he's addressing both genders because he's trying to get across the picture that each of us approaches worship in a different way. All right, what were you going to ask or say? Yeah, for sure. If a lady comes in here in a prom dress, probably going to be a little distracting. Now, difference is that I want to prime y'all, because if there is ever someone in worship service that lifts their hands in worship, try not to focus on it too much, because it is distracting if you're not used to it, right? Kind of weird if you're not used to it. But you know what's also weird? When Jimmy gets down on his knees and lifts his hands to pray, really hard to pray with him because all you're thinking about is he is 80 years old. He's going to need help getting up. Every time he needed help getting up. All right, so it can be distracting, but also the atmosphere, the attitude that he's putting forward is the idea of you want to make sure that you are focusing on worship and not on outside things, right? You're not worried about anger or fights when you're worshiping. In fact, when Jesus is talking about two Christians who have an argument with one another and they go to worship, does anybody remember what he says for them to do? He says, leave your gift at the altar, go fix the problem, right? So what that means is, if you have a fight with a brother or a sister and you're having an argument with one another, you walk inside, you put your money in the collection box at the entrance, you go outside in the parking lot and you fight it out. Not literally, physically fight it out. We're not talking throwing hands, we're talking lifting hands, okay? But you deal with the issue before you come into worship, right? Because the worshipful attitude is the most important thing that can happen in worship, right? Because if you don't have a worshipful attitude, then you're singing songs, and all you're worried about is when Gus and I fought about that one thing. Gus and I have never fought about anything, so we don't have to worry about that. But if a lady comes into worship and all she's focusing on is her physical attire, she wants to look good because there's a cute guy at church. I got a friend who's single. She is 29. And about 3 weeks ago, I was like, listen, you need to go to church and stop looking for a boyfriend. She was like, well, I'm looking for a boyfriend at church. No, you're at church. You go to church, you look for a boyfriend Monday through Saturday. Find one that goes to church with you, but you ain't trying to, no pickup lines at church, right? So, it's the worshipful attitude. Now, let's talk about the gender roles. Because next, he's going to nail down the gender roles even more so. So in verse 8, he says that men should pray. We know that's not absolutely literal in every single instance, but he's talking about worship, right? All right, so now verse number 11. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over man, rather she is to remain silent. And we'll talk about verse 13 here in a second. So, are men allowed to pray everywhere? Yes. Are women allowed to pray everywhere? Yes. Except when prayer is also an act of worship, which it is, then we need to make sure that the worship is being done in the way that God intended for the worship to be done, right? Okay? So, we get down to this verse that says women should learn quietly with all submissiveness. Why? What's the point in that? Well, we're talking about worship service. So, a Bible study, not a worship service in and of itself, right? It's not worship, it's Bible study. Now, do we offer worship in a Bible study? Yeah, we say a prayer, we do a song, we do some other worshipful act. Okay? So that's why there should be no qualms about a woman asking a question in a Bible study, because it's not worship. What we're doing right now is not worshiping. What we do in a minute is worshiping. When we sing songs, we have our devotional, we have a little mini worship service, that is worship. But what we're doing right now is just talking and trying to study together, right? Okay? So here's the thing. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over men, rather she is to remain silent. And you'll have some that say that is just a culture. Y'all didn't see the Amber Heard trial, but the guy that went, that's all I can think about. Do I have to answer that question? So some people will say, well, that's cultural. There we go, cultural. I'm from Arab. You say rural in one syllable, you say cultural in two syllables. Okay, so some people say that's just a cultural problem that he's addressing. Well, he's not talking about any other things cultural in this passage, is he? So we need to keep the passage in its context. We can't say that this one verse is cultural, but okay, well that means that praying for kings and praying for the government officials and those in high positions, that's cultural. We don't have to do that anymore. No one ever says that. In fact, the people that will say that verse 12 is cultural will say that we need to be praying for the government officials. If you can't get one without the other, right? If it's cultural and the passage context is cultural, then the entire passage has to be taken that way. Okay? So that means Jesus only saved the people in that culture. Doesn't make any sense, right? Okay, so he's talking about gender roles that are going to last the time. But then you'll have some people that say, oh, well, the word in verse 12, to teach, is the Greek word didaskalos. And so that means any imparting of knowledge whatsoever. And so they'll say no woman is ever allowed to impart knowledge to any male ever. And then that same guy who's saying that is probably hoping that his wife teaches his kids not to put their hands on the other. Right? So the word does not mean to impart any kind of knowledge whatsoever. It means to impart knowledge in this instant, in worship service. Okay? In worship, a woman is not to impart knowledge, but is to learn silently. Doesn't mean that she can't teach a male anything ever, because husbands, when was the last time your wife taught you something? My wife taught me this morning to not lock the keys in my truck. Right? Our wives teach us things all the time. Women teach us things all the time. To say that that is sinful is absurd. But in the context of a worship, of worship being offered, the reason that Paul lays this out is very specific. All right, verse number 13. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. All right, so verse 13 and 14. What is the reason that God gives for why women can't impart knowledge in a worshipful setting? In worship. What is the reason? Because women don't know enough. They're not smart enough. Miss Ginger. Whoo! I don't get that look from Miss Ginger very often. No, what's the reason? It's a reminder. It has nothing to do with the worth of a woman. It has nothing to do with gender, cultural gender roles or anything else. It is a reminder. It's a reminder for guys when we have to step up and lead that sometimes we need to make the decision. We need to step up and lead our families. We need to step up and lead our friends. We need to step up and lead the people around us. It's a reminder for women when maybe they listen to Lee preach and they go, man, I could have come up with a better sermon than that. Becca writes all my sermons. Just kidding, she doesn't. She did write one of my sermons one time. Well, really, she wrote a lesson for a ladies' day, and then I turned around and preached it the next day. So I joked around that she wrote my sermon. But it has nothing to do with the worth of another individual. It has nothing to do with culture. Because now we live in a culture where overwhelmingly it is much more equal man to female than it was in the first century, right? John is not allowed to see Jennifer as a possession anymore. It's probably good because she'd probably kill him. But we are in a much more equal culture now, but that doesn't mean that the standard changes, because the standard isn't about culture. It's about a reminder of the fall, right? It's a reminder of what happened and why we're here. All right, and then I saved this for very last because I don't want to take too much time on it because I don't really understand it. Verse number 15. Yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love, holiness with self-control. All right, so there's a couple ways of looking at this. Number one, there is the very erroneous way, I believe, in saying that if a woman is faithful and a Christian, then she won't have any complications in childbirth. That doesn't make any sense. But there are people who say that if a woman has complications in childbirth, then that means she wasn't faithful. I think those people have missed the mark. The one that I lean more toward is the idea that she will be saved in childbearing, because who brought salvation? The seed line, the child, the one that was born, right? I think that makes the most sense about this passage, but also this is a first century idiom, so it's really hard to understand because we don't really understand that turn of phrase that he uses there. There's also the idea, which I think has some merit, which is verse 15, she will be saved in childbearing if they, okay, so did you catch that? She will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, holiness, and self-control. So why does it go from singular to plural? And I think because the they there is male and female. It's not just the women. So it's not talking about actual complications, literal complications in childbirth. It's talking, in my opinion, it's talking about the idea that the childbirth of women brought about the Savior. And so while men may have preeminence in worship service, not preeminence, what's the word I'm looking for? That leadership and the I don't know what word I'm looking for. When men may be important in worship service, there we go, women are much more important, because without women, we can't have the Savior. And none of us would be here. I don't know if you knew that. Biology, I'm not trying to have a biology class, but without them, we are non-existent. All right, so, but the important part is verse 15, where he says they need to continue. So male and female need to continue in love and faith and holiness with self-control. Because you cannot lead a quiet, peaceful life without having faith and love and holiness and self-control. Right? All right, so that is 1 Timothy chapter 2. Next week we're going to pick up in chapter 3. And we'll keep going. I hope that made it as clear as possible. If you have any questions or anything like that, let me know, and I'll try to answer them next week before we get started. But just kind of to remind us, just 1 Timothy 2 is not talking about literal acts of worship. It's talking about a worshipful atmosphere, worshipful attitude, right? Is there anything wrong with a woman wearing braided hair? No, as long as she's not trying to bring undue attention, right? Is there anything wrong with a man lifting his hands in prayer or in worship? No, as long as not trying to bring undue attention, right? Which I think is an argument for a lot of things. God gave us a Bible and a brain, and you have to put them both together and use them both, right? All right, let's go ahead and take a break. The kids are back there. They are all hyped up on ice cream and stuff. Miss Stacy and Miss Brooke brought ice cream and toppings. And I have a feeling there's probably some extra over there. So I'm just saying, I think all of us could probably take both of them. We could have the extras if you want. All righty. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's see, what prayer requests do we have? I didn't take prayer requests before Bible study started. I'm sorry. What prayer requests do we have? Katie looked at me like she had something. No? No? Okay. Lots of people traveling. School's letting out. We obviously need to be praying for the families in Texas. Ron and Janice are driving, and depending on who you ask determines how long they're going to be gone. Because if you ask Janice, it's a week. If you ask Ron, he was like, well, we're going, and we might stop here and there. It might be a week or two. It might be 3 weeks. And Janice is like, we're going for a week. By June 8th, that's more than a week right there. He has a different goal than Janice. So what we will do is we will figure out whose goal is stronger by what day they get back. But we're praying for them that they can have a good trip. Is everybody out of school now? No? Katie's not? Kelly's not? When are you? You have 1 day left? Oh, well, that's lucky. No, I'm just playing. No, you have 2 kids. They're right there. Just kidding. Anyways, all right, so everybody's getting out of school, so I'm sure, we'll see y'all in August. No. Anything else? What else do we have? Yes, ma'am. Terry Noblin. Where do they live? Arkansas. All righty. Yeah, for sure. Terry Noblin, need to be praying for him and, well, the whole Noblin family. If you don't know, Laura's family in Arkansas, the Noblins, there's a lot of them. And they're pretty close, so be praying for the whole family. Who else? Yes, sir. You're heading out of town? All right. What did we used to call that? When somebody's going out of town, you got to pray for them. What is it used to be called? Traveling mercies or traveling grace or something? Yeah. All righty. So is that it? Is that everybody? All righty. What is our invitation song? 909. Go ahead and open up there. And y'all stick around after the prayer. Dalen's going to lead our prayer after we lead the invitation, because I have something that we need to give out tonight. So y'all just, when we say our prayer, just go ahead and sit back down. All right. If there's anyone here that needs to obey the gospel or have some need to come before the church and ask for prayers or encouragement or repent of sin in a public manner or something like that, I think it's really important that we remember that none of us are perfect, that all of us need grace and all of us need the gospel, and so it's important that we have time where we can make things right. Or maybe you need to repent and become a Christian tonight. We're going to stand, and Richard will lead us in a song. You can let us know while we do that. Let's stand. Free 'tis for you and me, let us haste, oh, haste to its spring. 'Tis a fount of love from the source above, and he bids us all freely drink. Will you come? Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all. There's a rock that's cleft and no soul is left. thirsty soul, hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all. All righty, let's see here. I got a couple things to give away here. These are in no particular order. Well, they are in a particular order. They're in the order that Miss Stacy texted them to me today. So some of the kids went to LADS and participated at the LADS convention, but not all of them. But all of them that have been coming pretty regularly lately have been working next door before the convention on practicing leading singing and reading Bible verses and praying for people. It's really cool. If you don't notice, when you go next door and you look in like the classrooms, there's like prayer lists everywhere now. They're just like splattered on all the walls and so they've been working on that stuff. And so we have a little thing just to give them some props from home, even though they got to go up to, some of them got to go up to Atlanta and walk across the stage and everything. And hopefully next year, all of them will get to. But, are y'all ready? Jason Tabler. Come up here and get this. It's okay, it ain't worship service, you can clap. All right. Ready? There you go. Give me a fist bump. All right, you ready? Tyler Tabler. Mackenzie Tabler. You win because you got the coolest shirt on. All right, you ready for this? Let's see how this works. Joshua Snow. Come here, buddy. Come here. He likes getting everybody's attention. Come here, Josh. Come here. No, okay, go that way too. All right, good. Safe. All righty. Let's see here. Ellie Sizemore. Lindy Sizemore. Y'all gonna get tired of clapping. All right, we'll have to save Trip and Seth till next week and make them really, really uncomfortable about it. All right, Cooper Brown. Libby Brown. Y'all sit in weird places now. They're all getting bigger, so they sit with each other now, and it's weird. They go big. All right, let's see here. Who else? Who we got here? That is not one. That's our sign-up sheet. Lindley Holdridge. There you go. And Morgan Holt. They're the best for last. There you go. She almost tripped too, so her and Josh could be buddies. Alrighty. And so we'll save the McMurrays for next week so we can embarrass them. But seriously, it's really cool to see our kids getting into LADS, not just because they get to go to convention and stuff, but it's really cool to see them being able to kind of learn more and grow more and kind of get out of their comfort zones more. And so hopefully next year we can increase and do even more at convention and more around the around the years. So, all right, let's go ahead and be dismissed. I will say I'm going to put this on the back table. This is the building cleaning and Lord's Supper list. If you can sign up for another month because the sheet got misplaced. So if you can sign up for a month between June and the end of the month, so that we can make sure that we don't have to pass out the box of cups anymore. Pretty nice. Anyways, all right. Thank y'all. Appreciate it.